Boldwood presents The Mastermind, written by Zara Cox, and read by Josh Witchard and Naomi Wood. Chapter 1. Caesar. The first and golden rule of the Salvatore family was simple. Famiglia, above all. The second rule was equally as sacred and the most practiced on a day-to-day basis. Don't get caught. Didn't matter if it was lifting a Benjamin from your nano's wallet while he dozed in his favorite wingback chair after one too many scotches, or you were smashing kneecaps under the Long Island Expressway. For the most part, I, as the oldest male of my generation of Salvatores, lived by that rule, and made sure I enforced it onto my younger siblings. Well, if we could have emblazoned it in place of the Salvatore name on the family crest that hung on the wall behind my grandfather's desk without it being fucking obvious, we would have. I didn't plan on getting caught today. So I carefully cycled through my options as I flexed my fingers on the wheels of my Formula One race car on a start-finish straight of the Monza racer. For once in my life, willfully shutting out the roar of the adoring Tifosi. I asked you a question. I snarled into the radio connecting me to the pit wall, blinking away the red haze I could feel descending. Yeah, I had a white-hot temper. And sure, everyone on the crew and in the pit lane knew about it. But I also had legendary control. A trait significant enough that my grandfather, Orazio Salvatore, head of the Cosa Nostra, a much revered Salvatore crime family, had bypassed his own son, my father, to hand me the coveted position of underboss. Except it wasn't a role I coveted. Except it wasn't a role I could refuse without dire consequences. My engineer remained silent, fury built as I crested the apex of the Curva Grande, my eyes narrowing on my target. Car in P1. Telltale static chirped right before another voice came on. "You've been given a 10-second penalty," Raphael, my brother, said. If he thought he could mitigate my anger by being the bearer of bad news, he was dead wrong. My nostrils filled with rage and internal combustion engine fumes from the cars in front of me. Repeat that. A resigned sigh. "You heard me, Caesar. The official steward's conclusion is that your overtake move endangered another driver." There was an edge in his voice that said he too believed the penalty was bullshit. Added to the great pile of bullshit that had been shoveled our way with increasing frequency lately, we'd passed the point of it being sheer bad luck. And that was a situation I intended to do something about. "Where's my engineer?" I asked my brother, even though we both knew why he'd deliver the news instead of Brazo, my race engineer. I wasn't above shooting or maiming the messenger, and this infraction was right up there with the worst of crimes. And a 10-second penalty with 11 laps to go, and being in second place would mean my chances of winning had gone from high possibility to zero. "I'm here, Caesar." To his credit, the man's voice only shook a little. "If you break later at Lesmo, we can gain a 10th to... Don't tell me how to drive, shithead." I seethed as G-forces flattened my helmeted head against the headrest in the steep parabolica curve. "Just give me the tire life deltas." The moment he finished rattling off the data, I stomped on the throttle and breathed out, re-engaging control and letting my wrath recede to the to-be-opened-later box, the back of my mind. The Tifosi, Italian Formula One fans so zealous they'd earned their own moniker, sensing blood, roared when I took a half-second off the leader in the next lap. The thrill of the hunt raised my temperature from simmering to a steady boil. Another crackle of the radio set my jaw into granite. "Do not fucking speak to me unless..." "Caesar," a soft voice interrupted. Bibiana, my sister and chief strategist. "At your current lap times, you'll finish 10.5 seconds ahead of fourth place. Podium finish in third place is better than nothing if you keep your head." She had a mind-boggling head for numbers, and a calculated mind that secretly terrified me at the best of times. That she also used that mind as an investment analyst to turn millions into billions for the Salvatore family was the only reason Orazio had allowed her to join Furia Racing, the Formula One team I'd risked life and limb to turn from dream to reality. The dream now hung in serious balance, because finishing anywhere but first, especially if the top step was taken by the scarlet-red car in the lead, would drive Orazio into another days-long ranting I could do without. Is second a possibility? I asked BB, even though I guessed what her answer would be. I'm sorry, but no. It'll be close, but we'll run out of laps before that can happen. Fuck! Despite a sound analysis, I couldn't stop myself from flooring the pedal. The 1,000 horsepower beast responded like a dream, harvesting every last kilojoule from the power unit, edging me closer and closer to my nemesis as the laps dwindled. From the corner of my eye, I saw the Tifosi rise to their feet as the grandstands whizzed by. Sparks flew behind my race car in a shower of light. We'd gone too aggressive with the ride height, and my tailbone was definitely feeling the effect of the carbon fiber floor scraping the ground, but I didn't care. Good thing I was fit and used to sustained pain. An ice bath after the race and a few cognacs, and I'd be right as rain. As to whether I would escape unscathed from Orazio's disappointment without him implementing the ultimatum hanging over my head was another matter. Jaw clenched tight, I winced through correcting an understeer at the Ascari chicane and rounded Parabolica just in time to see the scarlet monstrosity of Mancinelli Racing streak past the checkered flag to win the race. I stabbed my radio. Tell me we made it, I snapped. Yeah, we're 11.2 seconds ahead of fourth, Brazo confirmed. Take away the 10 seconds and we're cool, he added as if I couldn't do math. Third place, a spot I actively detested. It was 2 steps down from my rightful position, and it was a place that was becoming far too familiar. Suspiciously so. Rafa, debrief in an hour. I exhaled and maneuvered the racing green and black car into its resting position, confident my silent command was understood. On days like today, I was glad my brother and right-hand man was equally as ruthless, if not more so. With my dreams of wresting the Salvatore name from a bloody and gruesome history into a semblance of respectability, I would need every ally I could cajole, threaten, and blackmail into subservience. The continued roaring of the Tifosi drowned out the blows of my fists, pummeling the shit-stain whining incoherently for his life on the floor. The wild Italian fans were rabid on any given day, but when one of their own won, and another occupied the podium in Monza, the spiritual home of motor racing, the atmosphere was off the charts. They would be partying into the night in Monza and around the country. Unfortunately, unlike the past 3 years straight, wasn't a Salvatore mounting the top step and basking in the adoration of the thousands who flooded the racetrack after the checkered flag fell. My fury after being forced to stand next to Narciso Mancinelli, watch the cocky, snot-nosed kid smirk and fidget his way through the national anthem and all but shove the first-place trophy under my nose, was at boiling point. No doubt there would be images splashed all over the newspapers by nightfall, stoking the juicy private and public race and family rivalry, wondering how I was taking the threat of being deposed by a driver 10 years my junior. Yeah, that shit ended tonight. The smell of motor oil, hot tire blankets, and naked terror filled the air as I leaned over the man attempting to curl into the fetal position. His thin jumpsuit didn't protect him from the stomp of my boot on his ribs. There was a vein of recklessness in my actions tonight. For one thing, I was meting out punishment not in a secluded spot far from prying eyes, but in the back of the Furia Racing Team garage in the pit lane, where a dozen team motorhomes and hospitality suites filled with people risked someone stumbling onto my little impromptu, tete-a-tete with a sniveling weasel. The extra muscle that permanently shadowed every Salvatore from my grandfather down were dutifully guarding the various entrances, but still, with phone cameras everywhere these days, few things remained truly a secret for long. I didn't care. Not when everything I'd worked so hard for was on the line. When my fickle grandfather was growing restless, making noises about it being time to abandon that shitty little pipe dream. As if that same dream hadn't cleared the Salvatore organization a cool $500 million last year in legitimate sponsorship, and another $1 billion through a few shrewd laundering schemes. Frustration drove my fist into flesh, already pulpy from my beating, and I barely felt the wince as my knuckles jarred against bone. Another gasping appeal for mercy only made me madder. You know what you need to do. The pain stops if you give me the names. Easy, brother. an amused voice said from beside me. I turned to meet dark, cognac-brown eyes. Raphael took a step back at my fierce look, his hands rising in mock surrender while his lips twitched. You think this is funny? I seethed. I'm just saying you're ruining your hands, and unless you plan to keep your gloves on all weekend to the next race, someone will notice your handiwork. Do you even know for a fact that something's going on? I've been telling you for weeks that we have a mole, I snapped. Possibly several of them, because these fucking rats always travel in packs, don't they? Raphael's easy charm vanished. Death slid into his eyes, easing my black mood to have his full attention. You know this for a fact? Fist has been looking into it. He caught this one with a burner, connected a few dots, found some fresh cash in his account, and shook him up a little before he brought him here. I kicked the piece of shit, then glared at my brother. Before a month ago, when was the last time we lost 3 races in a row, or finished outside the top 5? Rafa's brows bunched, and he shook his head. Never. He looked down at the whimpering asshole, then sighed. Yeah, fine, but let someone else have a go with him. Relinquishing control didn't come easy to me. Never had. Which is why I was determined to make Furia Racing work. It was my ticket out of a mobster's shortened destiny at the end of a fired gun or a slit throat. And it had been working like a dream. We were a relatively young team on the Formula One racing circuit, but we'd entered with a proverbial bang and quickly made our mark by securing our place at the top of the pile, aided by not-so-clean money funneled from our various Salvatore concerns. Everything had been going swimmingly, or as smoothly as the Sicilian Mafia operation could go these days. Until the Mancinelli fucking family decided to muscle in where they weren't wanted. But that was the story of our lives, wasn't it? The Salvatores and the Mancinellis. The real-life, unoriginal Romeo and Juliet tragedy, locked in war and hatred over a long-dead woman. We've been the bane of each other's lives for almost 3/4 of a century. Our violent friction was well documented, and even celebrated since the Salvatores held the record for coming out on top. That tally tickled Horatio no end, hence his feral need to keep controlling everything. When it came to sustaining vendettas, he was firmly in the win-at-all-costs-or-die-trying camp. He'd made damn sure that unwavering principle was drilled into every one of us before we turned 5. Go on, it's my turn. Raphael shooed me away, moving in without permission. I gritted my teeth and let go of the weasel's lapel. Snatching a spotless handkerchief from my pocket, cleaned the blood off my knuckles, and paced away as my brother crouched next to my soon-to-be-dead ex-employee. Rafa didn't use his fist to shut the man up. Hell, he looked weirdly unattained watching the fucker cry and snot all over himself. I didn't hear what he whispered in the idiot's ear, but the already pale man went as white as a sheet. Then he started blubbering even faster. Arms folded, I suppressed that flash of unease I experienced when I watched my brother at work. Every male Salvatore had done a stint in the U.S. military. Some bullshit character-building plan Horatio Salvatore had read somewhere and decided to instill in his family. I was a Marine for exactly 1 tour before my father yanked me out. Raphael did 2 tours with a special ops team he still never spoke about. We all suspected whatever skills he'd been trained to utilize contributed to his deadliness. Even I was occasionally afraid to turn my back on him, and he was the only person I trusted above any other in the world. I watched him hook the tips of his fingers into the weasel's cricord cartilage and squeeze, that same placid expression on his face. Pain would be excruciating. The lack of oxygen, terrifying. You're about 30 seconds away from dying, Rafa informed him casually. Besides the 2 names you've given us, is there anyone else involved in your little operation? The man mouthed, No, 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 attempting to shake his head while wrestling free from Rafa's chokehold. Realizing he couldn't, naked fear surged in his eyes, right before the stench of ammonia filled the garage. Rafa hissed and sidestepped the spread of piss before it touched his polished Prada wingtips. Crap, he's telling the truth, he knows fuck all. At age 31 to my 32, Raphael had been my shadow since before we had puberty. He'd sliced and diced, pummeled and buried enough assholes to know when an interrogation was a lost cause. I returned to the traitor's side and leaned over to look in his florid face. You have life insurance? What? His eyes were bloodshot from Rafa's treatment of my punches, but they blinked rapidly to meet mine. You have a wife and 2 kids under 5. A man should make thoughtful contingencies for his family before he passes, especially when his job description includes other dangerous side gigs besides just hospitality. Don't you think? Please, boss, I didn't mean to. I was just... The money was... He quit talking while he was ahead in favor of staring imploringly up at me. Oh, if only I had an ounce of the mercy he sought. But nobody toyed with my dream and lived. Especially a dream the Mancinellis were horning in on like the fucking parasites they were. You didn't answer my question. I suggest you do it quickly. Not in the mood to stand here inhaling the fumes of your piss. Are you a sniveling, lying little piece of shit who doesn't take care of his family and betrays his employer for a few $1,000s or not? The misery that drenched from his face gave me my answer. I straightened and stepped back. Umberto Fist Laszlo, my head soldier and second cousin, so nicknamed for his thick fists and his absolute obsession and macabre glee with pounding everything to death, met my gaze. I gave him a single nod as I walked past him. Please, Don Cesar, please have mercy. I'll never betray you. The sound of bone shattering cut off his pleas. Raphael and half my soldiers fell in behind me, the other half staying to help permanently silence the man. As a rule, we didn't kill indiscriminately, but neither did we hesitate when the occasion called for it. He was a rat who'd secured a job in my team's hospitality department for the sole purpose of feeding information to our archenemies in Mancinelli racing. We found out 2 races ago, but played a waiting game, hoping he'd lead us to bigger fish, because the more damaging problem we had was in the sabotaging of our car's performance, which led me to believe the true culprits were in my aerodynamics and data analysis team. 2 crucial areas within any racing team, because without accurate data, we were fucked. Short of firing them all mid-season, a fucking non-starter, I was stuck with my ass hanging out until the traitors were found. My phone buzzed for the 100th time as we reached the parking lot. I ignored it. You know you have to talk to him sooner rather than later, right? You think, Captain Obvious? I snarled. Rafa's amusement only increased. Years of taking out whatever range of moods we happened to be in on one another had hardened him to my volatile temperament. I slid behind the wheel of my Furia Falco and punched the ignition. The roar of the supercar immediately eased the layer of my foul mood. Technically, the car wasn't licensed for road use yet, but it didn't hurt to be the underboss of a Sicilian-American crime family, with several police chiefs' phone numbers on speed dial, especially when you contributed millions of euros to their election campaigns. As I eased out of my parking spot, Rafa's own phone buzzed. I started to smirk at his grimace, but it stalled when he smiled again. It wasn't our grandfather trying to reach me through him. Not yet, anyway. It's the twins. They say the fuckers are at the club crowing about their win. The whole team? I asked casually, but in my chest something primal stirred. A different feeling to the bloodlust I'd just left behind. The kind of thrill derived from flirting with danger when you should know better. It was just as strong, equally lethal, and it was reserved for one person. Yeah, Rafa confirmed. Key players, at least, led by narc fuck. I felt his stare drilling into the side of my face, but kept my gaze on the road. Narciso Mancinelli, or narc fuck as Rafa and my twin brothers like to call him, was a cocky little shit. But in the grand scheme of things, he barely made a blip on my radar, not unless he was standing, undeservedly, on the top podium that belonged to me. Nah. When it came to the Mancinelli clan, my energy and focus were reserved for the top players. And at the top of that pile, with a very special place on my shit list, was one person. The eldest of Bonifacio's grandchildren, Maddalena Mancinelli. Chapter 2, Caesar. Half an hour later, and my mood had plunged further south. Frustration bit deep, pounding in time to the music blaring from the speakers in La Miragio nightclub. My gaze swept back and forth on high alert for anything and anyone out of the ordinary as I awaited Rafa's return. So far, he'd cornered 3 key Mancinelli racing crew members and discreetly taken them out back for a quiet word. Nothing. I was already riled up from the stupid shenanigans of the Mancinellis crowing about their race win like it was the second fucking coming. But that wasn't what was eating at my insides like battery acid. She wasn't here. You think she'd jump at the chance to rub my face in it like her Uncle Stefano, currently well on his way to being high and hammered, and feeling bolder by the second as he ventured closer to my VIP section, laughing and pointing like some stupid puppet while his audience laughed. I ignored his drunken sneers and caught Rafa headed my way. The subtle shake of his head made me curse under my breath. It had been a mistake coming. The thought stalled when the small crowd parted, and I saw her. She'd arrived without fanfare and almost slid under my radar. Bitterness and that slow sizzle of electricity that always attacked me whenever she breached my thoughts tossed my mood deeper down the toilet. Raphael dropped into the seat next to me, then followed my gaze. Yeah, I meant to tell you, Hot Tits has arrived. My teeth ground and I shut him a glare. Watch your fucking mouth. That was my name for her. No one else was allowed to use it, and if anyone found that fucking weird, it was their problem, not mine. Raphael returned my glare with a smile before his gaze shifted sideways. You want me to take care of him or have Fist do it? I read his lips more than heard the question, but I knew he was referring to Stefano. Ignoring him had made him bolder, and I could hear raucous laughter to my right. The twins, Dante and Lorenzo, 5 years younger and almost as zealous about racing as I was, were equally fucking pissed off at the scene unfolding before us. And by my silent order not to crack open a few Mancinelli skulls, the way they were itching to. Coming third had riled us all up, but descending into mayhem would get us nowhere. That said, maybe my earlier thought was right. Maybe we should have stayed away, tackled this differently. Now, who the hell was I kidding? I thrived in mayhem. And that state was being greatly exacerbated by having to watch her writhing on the dance floor in that fucking red cocktail dress, right in my line of sight. Just say the word, Rafa encouraged, drawing my gaze for a split second. At times like these, I envied his ability to remain calm, no matter the circumstances. There was a reason he was nicknamed the Silent Assassin. You didn't see or hear him coming until the knife had slid between your ribs, and he was walking away with a smile on his face. I'd seen him do it often enough. I was almost tempted to ask him to do it one more time to the idiot grinding his small dick against her. Madalena, the girl who'd left something, an indelible mark I couldn't rid myself of all these years later. No, she, I intended to take care of myself. My phone buzzed, another summons from Orazio. Continuing to ignore him wasn't the best course of action, but I wanted some answers before the inevitable confrontation. The de facto head of the Salvatore family hadn't used his fists to make a point for at least a week. That glorious reprieve was about to break, most likely on my face, if I didn't find answers for him. I'd taken many a black eye and bruised rib in my stride over the years. Raphael, too. But the old man, the fucking cunning fox, had wised up to the fact that his 2 oldest grandsons lost their minds when his fists were directed at their youngest brothers, or even worse, on Bibiana. If I didn't answer soon, that was where he would refocus his ire. I looked over to my left, to where the twins were staring at one another, engaged in that silent twin speak that frequently drove me up the wall. They looked as sullen and perplexed as I was furious. Dante, the second driver in my racing team, had gone from a consistent 1-2 reign on the podium alongside me to now finishing outside the top 5 in the last few races. His anxiety levels had gone through the roof lately, only his twin gluing himself to his side, keeping him on an even keel. We'd had every engineer, strategist, and aerodynamicist on the Furia racing team scratching their heads as to what had gone wrong before we concluded that there was nothing wrong with our racing car, that it was outside influences adversely affecting our team. If I couldn't find answers from the Mancinelli stooges, then I was headed straight for the top. I eyed my brothers, read every version of their barely bridled patience. Dante was a slightly less icy version of Rafa, while Renzo rivaled me in the hothead stakes. I could tell he was about to blow from the way his knees were bouncing and the loud cracking of his knuckles. Dante shot him a chill look that earned him a sneer. "We look like chumps sitting around with our thumbs up our asses. We should—" I stopped listening, my fixation on her seizing my attention. As with every time I'd seen her, except that night when my warning had well and truly riled her, as intended, Maddalena Mancinelli looked fucking flawless. The quintessential Sicilian beauty. Her skin glowed with the kind of health and vitality that didn't come from creams or endless pampering, but from Mother Nature's grace and favor. Old man Mancinelli may be nicknamed El Topo on account of his rat-like features, but by some stroke of genetic genius, all his offspring had escaped being saddled by his fugly DNA. Every last one of his daughters, and even the idiot Narciso, had inherited their grandmother and mother's striking good looks. It killed me that I could never take my eyes off her when she was in the same room. It's something about that one and only close encounter an eternity ago had imprinted her on me in a way I couldn't scrub off, no matter how I tried. And I had tried. Women in all shapes and sizes had graced my bed since I hit puberty, eager for Salvatore cock, if only for the chance to boast about it to their friends and family. It didn't hurt that mine was impressively miles above average, too. Dozens of women. And yet that itch behind my breastbone remained. Maddalena Mancinelli had helped herself to something vital of mine in those stolen moments out in the field in the middle of nowhere, Connecticut. Like the kind fucking Romeo should have known better than to risk with Juliet? Fuck no. There was no forbidden love, or even hate. That was reserved for the fuckers messing with my dream, here. There was something. Something I intended to get back, or die trying. I let all of that show on my face, and I saw the moment she clocked me from across the dance floor. The moment she saw it, too. The stunning blue eyes widened a fraction, and the hand, clutching her glass, trembled before she got control of it. The dumbass she was dancing with took one look at me and left her high and dry on the dance floor, a move she acknowledged with pursed lips and a fierce glare my way. I ignored the glare, for now, my attention on the glass's bubbly contents. When the hell did she start drinking? I knew for a fact El Topo had a list a mile long of all things forbidden where his granddaughters were concerned. Just as I knew, at the top of that list, etched in blood, was the warning to stay away from our Salvatores on pain of severe punishment. And yeah, drinking was in the top 10. As if she read that thought too, a corner of her mouth lifted. Challenge issued. "How long are you two gonna keep eye-fucking each other? I'm getting fucking pregnant over here." The twins burst into laughter, the thick tension easing a fraction before ratcheting right back up. Rafa, he didn't heed the warning in my voice. "I'm just saying there's only so much of the sex fumes I can take before shit gets weird, you being blood and all. Either do something about it or shut that shit down." I managed, barely, to drag my eyes from her scowl at my brother. "Whatever the fuck you think you see, you're wrong." He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. Mutiny flashed across his face before he clamped his mouth shut. I didn't fool myself into thinking this would be the end of it, though. My brother was dogged, if nothing else. Another skill he'd honed in that super-secret part of the government he refused to divulge, no matter how much liquor I poured down his throat. "You have a job to do. Whatever it takes to find the mole, do it. I want them dealt with before the next race. Understood?" He didn't answer immediately, but he got the gravity of my order, and honored it with a two-finger salute a second later. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Another burst of raucous laughter from across the room, loud enough to be heard over the thumping music, drove the twins to their feet. Unsurprisingly, they'd reached the end of their tether. "We had enough of this shit. Either we break some ribs, preferably that pesky mierda narc fucks, or we leave. Which is it gonna be, brother?" I leaned forward, elbows on knees, clenched fists dangling between my legs. Go home. I'll follow shortly. Rafa's eyes narrowed. Frate, whatever you're thinking is probably not a good idea, he muttered for my ears only. My gaze lanced back to her, my insides spasming as if someone had shot a taser into my belly. Relentless echoes of bodies touching, writhing, exploring in the dark unraveled through my brain. My fingers twitched. I bunched them into tighter fists. Yeah, maybe not, but when have you known that to stop me? Rafa sighed. Just make sure you're well equipped for hazardous weather in case you fall through that thin ice you're skating on, see? I didn't answer, but my clenched jaw spoke volumes for me. He jerked his chin at the twins, who left without saying another word, leaving behind the bodyguard stationed strategically in the room. Electric volts rippling through me surged higher when I rose to my feet and started across the room toward my target.
Chapter 3. Maddalena. The first rule for a Mancinelli woman was unbreakable. Stay away from the Salvatore men, or else. It had been drilled into my sisters and me from birth, and enforced with many a backhand from Mancinelli men if we so much as thought about breaking that rule. But the team was riding high from our third straight win, and winning, especially in Monza, the birthplace of Formula One racing, was like winning every single lottery in the world. When that happened, there was only one place worth celebrating, or you might as well stay home. L'Amiraggio. Podium positioning wasn't something we'd needed to worry about in the past, since we'd been nowhere near the podium, never mind winning a race. And while I'd been disappointed for the team in previous seasons, as the consigliere of my family's assets and CEO of Furia Racing, in charge of managing the hundreds of millions of dollars that flowed in from both legitimate and more creative areas of the business, I couldn't very well stay in my hotel room tonight of all nights. But Christ, how I'd wanted to. Because I'd suspected that he would be here. And I was right. I could feel the burn of his hatred from the VIP lounge, where he sprawled amongst the velvet cushions with the indolence of a panther. I raised my glass to swallow a mouthful of champagne someone had thrust in my hand. But just like most people reacted when Cesare Salvatore was in the same room, I knew I would choke on it. That my body would refuse the simplest commands. Case in point, my maddening inability to look away. So I saw the moment he rasped a command, and his brothers and a handful of soldiers made their way to the entrance and left him alone. With any other man, I would have raised my expensively trimmed eyebrows at the sheer lunacy of leaving himself vulnerable in a room full of vicious, cutthroat Mancinellis. To the last man, I knew each of them carried a blade, a gun, or a knuckle duster. Some, all three. But Cesare Salvatore demonstrated not a single ounce of vulnerability. He met my stare, dominated it, until I shivered with the urge to self-preserve, to lower my gaze. Then, only when he was satisfied that his deep intimidation had caused the fractures he sought, did he rise, an exquisite marble statue coming to life. With every step he drew closer, my breath knotted tighter in my lungs. The heir to the Salvatore throne had turned head since he grew height and muscles in the summer of his 15th birthday. Those muscles had been honed on the football field of the nauseatingly expensive Calmont Catholic Academy in New York City, then studiously maintained by taking an active part in physically suppressing any challenges to his birthright. It was an open secret that to tangle with Cesare Salvatore, his brothers, or any of his soldiers on a dark street corner was to never see the light of day again. His breathtakingly good looks were passed down from both his parents, borrowing the square, movie star heartthrob jawline and piercing charcoal gray eyes of the Salvatore man, and the sensual mouth and haughty cheekbones from his late mother. At 6'3", he towered over most men in any room, but with the dark silk shirt, darker jacket and pants, and thunderous fury rolling across his face, He was a Force 5 tornado, hell-bent on inflicting maximum damage to anyone who dared to cross his path. It wasn't surprising, therefore, that even with my soldiers twitching to reach for their guns, and many members of my family tensing at the very visible threat, everyone still gave him a wide berth, allowing him clear passage to where I stood at the bar. No one had forgotten the humiliation of being trounced in our last 2 skirmishes, least of all my grandfather. It was why tonight's win was especially sweet, why the celebrations were particularly wild, and why no one wanted it ruined. If you're here to toss about more threats and warnings, save your breath, I preempted before he could speak, fighting the shock sheeting through me that Caesar planned on speaking to me. It had been well over 10 years since our last direct interaction, after all. Narciso told me you didn't take our win well, at all. The corner of his mouth ticked up, but it wasn't from amusement. He'd been practically combusting during the podium celebration. It hadn't helped that my little brother hadn't held back from rubbing his face in it. Standing on the ground beneath the iconic Monza podium, I'd willed time to fly by before Caesar gave in to his worst impulses and pounded my baby brother into the floor. I'd seen him do it to others many times in the past, including that night. The memory was seared into my brain. Growing up, I'd thought that as second-generation children of a Mafia family brought up in America, they'd be less aggressive. Watching 19-year-old Cesare Salvatore pounding into a coma the boy who dared to brush up against my ass, then following that up with almost killing my best friend's brother for the simple crime of being our driver and protector that fateful night, had taught me different. And it hadn't even been that he'd done it because he was interested in me. Oh no, he'd made his scathing feelings clear that night when he'd discovered his mistake. He may have battered the poor boy with his fists, but me, he'd battered with his words. From then, I'd earned myself the dubious title of Most Hated Mancinelli. I clenched my fist around my glass of untouched champagne as he stepped far too close, saturating me with the scent of smoked wood and wild thunderstorms. That my first, unchecked instinct was to step closer, bury my face in his throat or his wide chest and just breathe him in, was appalling and bracingly disturbing. So I was eternally grateful when my knees obeyed my command to remain locked, my body as still as I could maintain it in the presence of a feral predator. I wished I could say that was an exaggeration. The smoldering glare I'd sustained from across the room for hours now bore down on me with naked fury and dislike. Enjoying your win? Any reason why I shouldn't? Absolutely, he breathed. It wasn't earned honestly, and you know it. Anger stiffened my spine. Any win that isn't achieved by Furia Racing must be manipulated somehow. Is that what you're saying? I tossed back. He stared at me in silence, his gaze drilling deeper. I couldn't help myself. I slowed my own gaze to trail his face, over the fierce slashes of his dark eyebrows, past the silky fans of his eyelashes to the chiseled cheekbones and severe jawline, ending at the sensual dark red curve of his mouth. That mouth had haunted and titivated thousands of my dreams. I hated and desired it in equal measure, a secret I intended to take to my grave. What? I snapped, when the silence stretched my nerves. I'm trying to work out if you've developed a good poker face, or if you're really that clueless. There was a time when I recall you weren't so skilled at hiding your true feelings, he mused. I was a teenager, and if my memory serves, you hadn't quite gotten a handle on that infamous Salvatore temper. Oh wait, what am I talking about? You still haven't, have you? I was belly dancing with 10-foot-high flames. Any minute now, I was going to be devoured in an inferno. He didn't fall for my taunt. Cesar inhaled, slow and steady, his broad chest expanding until it seemed to fill my vision. Control locked into place as smoothly as a gear shift on his powerful racing car. Pivoting slightly, he dropped an elbow onto the bar countertop, his body relaxing as he studied me like a specimen beneath his microscope. Believe me, sweetheart, when I truly lose control, you'll know about it. The silky smooth warning of danger tunneled through me, straight between my legs, in a shockingly invasive caress I couldn't bat away. My thighs clenched as I scrambled to drag my brain from images of a wild, out-of-control Cesare Salvatore, in my bed, pinning me against a wall, bending me over a table. Are you going to get to a point anytime soon? You're harshing my vibe. And in case you haven't forgotten, my kind isn't supposed to mix with yours. Somebody might just tattle to your precious nonno. Then where will you be? Anger flashed across his face, but he throttled it almost immediately. Anywhere I fucking want. I'm a grown man. And leave my grandfather out of this. A flash of bleached blonde hair darted across my vision, and I almost groaned when its owner cut through the crowd, making a beeline for me. Come to offer your congrats? Only, I don't think I heard you give it over the sound of the tifosi roaring my name. Narciso said with a full smirk and twinkling eyes, right before throwing his arm around my shoulders. Is he bothering you? He didn't bother to keep his voice down. A few heads turned our way, tension rising. Under normal circumstances, I would have welcomed my baby brother interrupting an unwanted conversation, but my heart lurched with fear for him beneath the livid gaze Cesar slanted him. Fuck off, Pichiridu, he growled. The grown-ups are talking. Ciso's face reddened. He was about to lose his shit. Unfortunately, the Salvatores weren't the only ones cursed with violent tempers. Another reason I needed to end this conversation ASAP. Besides, while I was sure I could talk myself out of confrontation with my father and grandfather, especially if I exaggerated how sorely the Salvatores were taking their loss today, a prolonged conversation with the enemy wouldn't be as easy to explain away. I held out my glass to Ciso. Get me another one, please? This one's gone warm. I was his big sister, and if nothing else, respect had been bred into us, so he didn't tell me to piss off to my face, but his eyes said so loud and clear. Snatching the glass from my hand, he stalked to the other end of the bar. You let him disrespect you like that? Cesar snapped, narrowed eyes trailing Ciso. I stepped in front of him, visibly blocking his ferocious gaze. You leave him the fuck alone, Cesar. I mean it. As the oldest, I was a mama bear when it came to my siblings, especially since our mother had become a husk of herself for reasons shrouded in family secrets. As lethally dangerous as Cesar was, I wouldn't hesitate to take him on if he threatened my loved ones. His head snapped back to me, nostrils flared, and eyes darkened dramatically. I don't remember giving you permission to use my name, he said, his voice low and infinitely lethal. I hadn't used it since that night, almost a decade and a half ago, except in my helpless dreams, when my traitorous hand snuck between my legs and I woke in a sweat, poised on the precipice of yet another thwarted climax. This isn't the Dark Ages. If you don't want to be addressed when we're speaking, feel free to stick to your side of the room. You're playing a very dangerous game, sweetheart. A shiver sizzled through me. Now who's taking liberties? His mouth twitched again, but his eyes remained lava hot, smoldering with their promise to devastate. You have the nerve to talk to me about taking liberties when you're playing dirty? A cool breeze washed over my neck. Sore loser or not, the look in his eyes was deadly serious. Cesar Salvatore hadn't spoken directly to me in years. That he'd crossed the room to do so tonight, in full view of his family and mine, with Vesuvius-hot feuds and bodyguards, who even now watched us with hands hovering near their weapons, was gravely significant. I'll say it again. I have no idea what you're talking about. A muscle ticked in his jaw. You have until the next race in Azerbaijan. Hand over the mole and stand down whichever official you've got in your pocket tossing penalties my way, and I may consider drawing a line under your little shit show. He stepped forward and leaned close. His breath washed over my ear, and the most vigorous shiver yet juddered through me. This close, I know he didn't miss it. That he didn't really care about his effect on me. Yet my belly clenched in shame as he continued, Don't, and I'll make your life hell for the rest of the season. And that will be just the start. Shock replaced the lustful shiver as I watched him wander back to where he'd come from. He jerked his head at Raphael, the other terrifying Salvatore. With the same height and build, and only 11 months separating them, people often wondered if the brothers were fraternal twins. Granted, they were thick as thieves, and often one was never far behind the other, Raphael tending to trail his brother in his rightful place as Caesar's second. Together they turned heads, in fear and the kind of morbid fascination reserved for ruthless, beautiful predators. But somehow, my eyes always skidded past Raphael to his brother, my breath always catching at the first sight of the heir. What the fuck did he want? Ciso grumbled, returning with my champagne. And why the hell did you send me away? I didn't want to hurt his pride by telling him Caesar would eat him for breakfast and barely remember the meal afterward, so I took the drink and took an unwanted sip to buy myself time to digest what Caesar had said. A mole. Bribing race officials? What the fuck? Maddie? I pinned a smile on my face. We're having a great night. I didn't want him to ruin it. Skepticism narrowed his eyes. Then why tolerate him in the first place? I came over because it didn't seem like you were in a hurry to tell him to fuck off, he said, suspicion joining the skepticism. Think about it. What do you think would have happened if I had? I nodded to where a drunk Stefano swayed on his feet, surrounded by a few more Mancinelli lieutenants and a gaggle of the race bimbos who gravitated to power and fame like vultures to carrion. The product of my grandfather's third wife, my uncle was only 5 years older than me, and a complete hothead who gave shoot now, ask questions later a whole new meaning. With them in that state, do you want to end the night with a body count and a trip to jail we'll need to explain to Nonno? And a possible summons to the race authorities? He frowned. Of course not, but let it go, Ciso. I firmed my voice. His mutiny lingered. Knowing there was a 50-50 chance he'd ignore me, I gulped down another mouthful of champagne and set the glass down. I'm heading back to the hotel. Don't stay too long, yeah? I felt his brooding gaze all the way to the door. The 2 bodyguards assigned to me peeled themselves from the shadows and fell into step beside me. I didn't acknowledge them, nor did they me. I learned the lesson the hard way, not to trust or confide in the men my grandfather chose to guard me, after a horrifying showdown the night I came face to face with a Salvatore for the first time. Men who were supposed to guard me had turned on me on a dime to save their skins, leaving me to my grandfather's weeks-long wrath and a painful reminder of our family's #1 rule. Bitterness churned through me at the memory of that night, and of the control exerted on me since then, especially when my other flaws rose to the surface like unwanted sludge. I was a grown woman of 31, and yet I'd had sex only a handful of times in shadowy places with faceless men whose names I didn't recall. My father believed I was a virgin, taking pride in assuring my grandfather when the subject of organizing a husband for me came up. It would have been hysterically funny if it wasn't desperately sad and pathetic. So I dragged my mind from it as the armored SUV rolled to a stop and my bodyguards ushered me inside. Our carefully vetted hotel was only a mile away. The well-oiled machine that was the Mancinelli Mafia Famiglia had booked the whole floor, so there would be minimal cross-pollution with unapproved guests. When we arrived, I barely took note of my surroundings or the usual gaping audience that I tended to attract with my burly bodyguards wherever I went. Thankfully, this was Italy, and in a luxury hotel, people tended to think they were in the presence of some overblown celebrity instead of what I really was, the granddaughter of one of the most notorious members of Cosa Nostra to ever come out of Sicily in the last century. I made it to my hotel suite with very little fanfare, ignoring all but the most important texts pinging on my phone from my sister, Sophia. A little rabbit told me tonight's celebrations were interesting. I groaned under my breath. For a family that ran an organization that thrived in the underbelly of society, we sure were shit at keeping secrets. Or maybe the more accurate assessment was my sister's ability to pry secrets from stone. Her uncanny gift of telling truth from lies, bullshitter from traitor, had become an invaluable asset Bonifacio relied on more and more. Lately, she'd been more absent than present at our home in upstate New York. My inquiries as to why had earned me a sharp rebuke from my father and stone-faced silence from my own sister. Not gonna lie, it had hurt a little. Okay, a lot. It had raised suspicion that either Sophia really didn't want to be close to me as I dearly wanted, or that Bonifacio was succeeding in driving a wedge between us for his own purposes. Is it worth asking where you are? I hedged in answering her question, partly through worry, partly because I needed time to parse through my own thoughts. Nowhere interesting. The reply was laughably predictable. Nothing interesting over here, too. Yes, I was a little annoyed by her non-answer. Annoyed and worried. Eye roll emoji. Answer my question, Mads. Or I'll go digging myself. While it had taken me a long time to accept the inevitability of my surname and birthright, Sophia had acclimatized to being the daughter and granddaughter of a gangster long before she'd hit puberty. There'd been no need for me to protect her as I did my two other sisters, because she'd towed the line from the moment it was shown to her with a cunning dexterity that left me speechless and a little terrified. Because Sophia was always 3 steps ahead. Despite her being my little sister, I had no idea what her end goal was. She was the one most comfortable in Bonifacio's shadow, and it had made me wonder if it was the reason for the distance between us. She doted on Narciso, though, and I was guessing that was where she'd gotten the info tonight. Sore losers being sore. Nothing to worry about. Promise. I held my breath, hoping she'd drop it. She didn't answer for several minutes. Then another dreaded ping arrived. Grimacing, I read it. Cool. Thinking I'll join you in Azerbaijan. Thoughts? She was testing me, feeling me out. Probably on Bonifacio's orders? I'd known since I could walk and talk that my father, uncle, and the smattering of cousins all jumped to my grandfather's bidding, but I'd believed I stood between my siblings and Bonifacio's absolute control of their lives. Lately, with Sophia's activities and secrets, I wasn't so sure I'd succeeded. Telling her to stay away would have been as good as shouting from the rooftops that something was going on. Having her come would be asking for another set of eyes on a situation I wasn't sure was a problem yet. And if Sophia thought Narciso was under threat from the Salvatores, who the hell knew how she would react? I paced my hotel room, pressure building behind my eyes as I considered my response. I had 2 weeks before the next race. I could go home, head her off at the pass. But She was a resource I may well need by then, if I hadn't gotten to the bottom of things myself. With a sigh, I surrendered to the inevitable. Sure, it'd be good to see you. Kiss. I watched the speech bubble pulse for 5 seconds, then disappear. Shaking my head, I tossed my phone on the bed, then finally allowed myself to replay my conversation with Caesar. I was 99% sure his trigger finger was itching for retribution after losing the race to us. But he'd seemed dead certain of his allegation. And as much as I was unwilling to admit it, I came from a family who stopped at nothing to win. It didn't even hurt that the men in my family would go over my head as the official Mancinelli family's consigliere to make a damning decision to bribe our way into a championship. The end result was the only thing that mattered, especially when pitted against the Salvatores. I stepped beneath the shower, Caesar's threat ringing in my ears. But then, in my vivid imagination, the tenor of his voice changed, his meaning taking on a different, more sensual timbre. I'll make your life hell for the rest of the season, and that will be just the start. My nipples pebbled under the cascading water, the promise of more forbidden interactions with the underboss of the Salvatore organization sending ripples of danger-edged delight through me. Bracing one hand on the wall, I squeezed my eyes shut as the other hand slid down my belly to the hot, pulsating place between my legs. I moaned when I breached my puffy lips, unsurprised to feel myself already wet and slippery. My shaky gasp blended into the hiss of water as I toyed with my oversensitized clit. The shape of his mouth, the sensation of his breath on my neck, the glorious headiness of his scent, the promise of fury and shattered control in his eyes, and always, always, that kiss. The one that had set us on a path to hell, a taste of the forbidden blended perfectly with danger. All it took was remembering the feel of his Salvatore mouth on my Mancinelli lips, his outlawed tongue sweeping in to stroke mine, my middle finger sliding deep into my pussy, and I was unraveling. My choked moans filled the shower as I came hard enough to feel my heartbeat pound in my ears. To accept that I was still, all these years later, hopelessly addicted to Cesare Salvatore. To the last man on earth I should be thinking about, never mind lusting after. The enemy heir who could spark a war with a snap of his fingers. Chapter 4. Maddalena. The past.